so wonderful. I just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm so glad I watched this with all of you instead of on my couch on Netflix and at 1 a.m. or something. You know, felt like such a communal experience.
Yeah, it's like, it's for anyone who doesn't know anything about Senior, but if you love cinema, there are so many layers of life.
It's great to be
in
here.
cinema and art and more life, and that was what Senior was. I mean, you can't fake that, you know. And he had that till the very end.
I'm just so glad you had this experience. I remember talking to you. It feels like years ago, but when is it? You say, "Yeah, I'm kind of doing this thing on Robert Downey's Senior." You know, I'm shooting. I'm like, wow, that sounds fascinating. You know, I mean, I'm a fan of his from way back before I knew the name Robert Downey Jr. You know, if you're watching films at a certain era, you know, all those films. And I just, everything you were saying about it sounded so fascinating. So anyway, well, congratulations on how
Thank you. And
wonderful
I do
it
remember
turned out. I didn't know where it was going, you know. I didn't have much info, of course. But it's just, I can't imagine. I don't know, we'll talk about the origins.
The origin is actually, thanks for asking, because I'm really emotionally rocked right now, and so that's easy to focus on something non-emotional, like the beginning of the project. My wife, Emily Ford, produces docs for Team Downey, and part of her job is to meet filmmakers and look for different things for the Downeys to get involved with. And so as part of a general meeting, she met the filmmaker Chris Smith, and he had made another film called Jim and Andy, which was a film about Jim Carrey, and you know, kind of
which if you haven't seen that, you got it. We'll see every Christmas film, but anyway.
Really cool, and it was archival based, and she just said, well, you know, it came up that if he ever had a chance, he would love to maybe do something like that with Robert one day. Separately, I had been immersed with Robert Downey doing Jr. doing behind the scenes footage and all kinds of different shoots and projects over a period of years. So she said, well, why don't I pair you with Kevin, who's been shooting with Robert, have all this pool of footage, and maybe we can create, you know, something together. So we were just all jazzed up. Chris was in, and Emily and I went one day to the office and pitched it to Robert. And he said, no way, not gonna do it. Not interested to make a film about myself. And, you know, in that moment, we were like, how did we just miss, we just crapped, you know, everything, we shot the bed here.
Right.
And but he said, if you want to do my father, I'm in. And so we were like quickly, obviously excited, went back to Chris Smith. He said, oh yeah, let's do it. And so probably a week or two after that, maybe 3 weeks, Chris, Emily, myself went out and just started filming with Senior. And at that time, you know, with documentary, you're just kind of feeling it out and saying, can we get something in the can? And I remember Chris and I were very confused because early on, Downey Sr. kept saying, I want to show you these films of mine so that we can cut them in. And he had his own idea for a film right off the bat.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt? I just love that aspect that he, filmmaker, commandeers whatever you guys are doing to make his own film.
Yeah.
To kind of steal a film within a film.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great impulse. And to think that I guess that's his last film, it has to be.
Absolutely, and that's something I think it's pretty clear in this, but there's definitely a final Downey Sr. version of the film. It's 1 hour and 50 minutes, and it was very meaningful to me. I was there the moment when he called it, and it's very different. I like to think of it as a flip side to this film because it was a collage of his whole entire life. So you see us in the movie editing. What we were doing was going through every single film he had ever made, pulling moments that interested him, and then weaving it together in a collage. But then he also wanted outtakes of our documentary.
Okay.
So, for example, I said, Senior, we've got a great interview with Alan Arkin. He says, wonderful things, you've got to watch it. And he said, I love Alan, he's a great guy, but I don't really want to hear anything he has to say about me.
Yeah.
However, I got him to watch it, and in the end he goes, there's one scene I like. It's the moment when he walks out of the interview and starts eating kumquats. Put it in. And so in Senior's cut,
something that has
he
no
utilized
business in this film.
So it's the perfect counterpoint. And at some point, we do hope, you know, people in the right way can experience his film.
This is a double feature.
Yeah.
So Is that film finished, or does it have a title?
It actually, we were so busy making it, we never actually had a title, so we just call it the senior cut. And
Okay.
maybe that's the title, but it's interesting because his is so abstract and such a collage of his own personal cinema that I even used old movie credits and titles from his films to be the titles and like end credits on his cut. In terms of is it finished, that's a really interesting question because we didn't sound mix it, we didn't color correct it, color time it, or any of that. But with Senior, we locked that cut. Now, when I left, I didn't think that was the last time I was ever going to see him.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it worked out. So right now, that cut, I've protected and it's there.
But he locked picture. He felt good about it.
100%. And matter of fact, the last night we ever worked on it, he said, it's got to be lean and mean. And we cut 12 minutes out.
Oh, okay.
Got it down to a reasonable 150.
So it's his eyes wide shut.
Yeah.
It's his.
Absolutely. And one thing I like to reflect on about it is that to his very last moments, he got to live and breathe cinema. That was what this man cared about. It was what drove him. And I can actually speak more freely because Junior's not here. But I just love the fact that as his son, knowing his dad, the one gift he could give him in those final years of his life was to immerse him in another movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That was everything to Senior, as his wife said. I mean, it kept him alive. There was a lot of cognitive therapy also happening with him making the film within the film, and probably even some of us pushing him to be on camera.
Yeah.
You know, that push and pull was nice for him, I think.
Well, yeah, you just see he's still excited about life. He's got something he's living for. He's witty as always and has that little extra energy in him, even when he's, you know, that's just great, you know, for an artist. You know, it's really rare. Filmmakers, you kind of get put out to pasture if you're dependent on others' money. You know, it's a real gift. You know, I see this as like, okay, that's the way to, that's the way to go out if you're so lucky to be making a film, lock picture on your deathbed. That sounds pretty perfect. I'll sign up for that right now.
And it was a very existential thing for me, you know. Yeah. Basically, I'm half his age. Actually, a little bit older, but basically half his age. And I would be sitting there thinking, my God, like the time goes by so quick. I could be 80, 84. He was 84 when he passed. And just thinking about that, all the projects that I've ever shot and just kind of seeing this mashup of your life. And what I thought was so cool was how much he loved what he had done. It wasn't like he was looking back with regrets. He was so amused with all of those things. The monkey. Yeah.
Well, it seems like he was pretty amused when he was making it. You know, he was pretty happy with
so whatever he
all these happy accidents and things he was kind of conjuring up. He seems like a great orchestrator of kind of inspired, chaotic craziness, you know.
And, you know, you've devoted your life to film. So many people that just love it get that. And then I think even if you don't, whatever your thing is that you've devoted your life to be able to enjoy it and to love something that much to the end, that's something that I learned from Senior. And I've missed him a lot since he's been gone, a lot. And I told you, I've been working on some other projects now just to try to keep that momentum going. There's a thing I've been working on, and sometimes I like to just get lost in it, and I close my eyes and just kind of imagine he's right over there egging me on, because that was something I got to experience. And he was the ultimate improv artist in that sense. He would say, let's try it.
Yeah.
So I find that if I'm having creative blocks, I kind of just feel Senior right over there.
Yeah,
saying,
just kind of feeling it like, I like that. It's like, I was so moved too by Robert, you know, Junior, you know, just like, wow, because he grew up, you were saying love of cinema, that just kind of, like for me and you know, you find it and it becomes your thing. But he was just so born into it. It's an interesting portrait of someone born into not the industry at all, but the art form. Yeah. You know, the life of an editing room or what it is to be, you know, working on films or actors, or it's so exciting, but it seems pretty precarious, you know. I see Robert as a real triumph of I mean, I two survivors in different ways, you know, different timescales, but wow, I'm just so happy for both of them that
Yeah.
they had this experience, that they both got through their, in their own time, their problems. And I don't know, it's pretty triumphant in a way. It's like art kind of triumphs, or the spirit of that triumphs over all their worldly addictions and problems and all that. So I have more admiration for Robert than ever, which is saying a lot, because I regard him, so highly. But wow, he could have been a very different scenario. He's just a pure artist, and it's interesting to hear them say, "Oh, well, he was that the first day he showed up." It's like, yeah, that's Robert. But there's a lot of other kids, like, they would be bitter. Like, look what atmosphere I grew up in. Of course I was doomed. I was a drug addict. It's like that. All that, but he has a great second act. I don't know. I just found myself very moved by his life in relation to his dad's, and that they're so close. And I don't know.
Yeah, and we've worked with him for years, and yet I found myself coming away with a whole new appreciation for him. So it was like you kind of know someone, but then I didn't know him that way. And this, for all of us involved, like I said before, it was myself, my wife Emily, Susan, Robert, Chris. Now, obviously, you get to post-production, you have a whole army, but those 5 people, all of us were so moved. It changed our life, watching the fearlessness with which he faced what was going on with his dad, and then even the layer of them talking about how his dad was with his second wife as she passed with ALS.
Yeah, wow.
So you can't come away from something like this and then look at your own life and not be moved. And in my case, it's definitely changed my life, and I've credited Robert a lot just for showing that vulnerability, because for many years he had gone and off and he'd become Iron Man and he had done all these things, and I think more than ever he was kind of the man behind this big mask, and this film felt like he just dropped the mask, and it really showed us who he was. And I mean, seeing a man cry and being in the room when he's facing that stuff, that was tough. As a friend, even filming, you're like, should I even be filming this? Like, there was times where I kind of felt like maybe I should just not film. Right. But he and his dad both made it pretty clear that they wanted to face it together. So, I mean, I think it's very special, and I've gotten to work on a lot of things for a lot of years, but, with this, just if I because I had, several different roles, but if I just put that editor hat on for that, I was always thinking Maisels Brothers meets Hal Ashby.
Oh, yeah.
So there's kind of a movie and a mortality kind of thing with the Hal Ashby, but then that raw verite, you don't really know, and you're just going with it, like the Maisels.
Yeah, well, talk about your working relation with Chris Smith. Like, he's a fascinating filmmaker and just a brilliant documentarian, and I've seen, I think, almost everything he's done over the years. But did you feel like you were on the same page? Like, when you started, what was he thinking? What were you thinking? Did he know Senior's movies? What was he? What did he think he was getting into?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, and I wish he was here to answer that, so I don't want to misspeak. But I will say, I know that he had gone through some things where his dad had major health challenges. So there was something, especially as that became a part of the story, that I think was touching to him. But interestingly enough, Chris wasn't so familiar with Senior's films, and he was very honest about that, from the beginning. So for him, it was about, sometimes doing documentaries, you can learn about something that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
like
that
making a film about something to get to know something.
So that was pretty cool for him.
And that's probably pretty representative. Sorry to interrupt, but there's the generations who, like, I always go Robert Downey. Like, I always think of the filmmaker, and Junior started showing up in the 80s. See films like Less Than Zero. I was like, oh, Robert Downey Jr. Who's, so he's his kid, I was always senior oriented just because I knew those films. And it was just fascinating to see Robert in Hollywood, of all places, because I thought, oh, you couldn't be out of the mainstream more, but then here the kid is, I'm seeing him in, Less Than Zero studio type films. But, from the beginning, you never forget when you first see Robert Downey Jr. But I didn't know. When did Senior get the name Senior is what I want to know. Because there was Robert Downey and there was Robert Downey Jr.
Right.
When did he start being called Senior?
That, you know what?
It took Robert's.
I think that is probably what it is. Is like probably as Robert began to rise, then they're just like, oh, now it's Senior. But
yeah, because you know, like there's a Frank Sinatra Jr. out there, but you never called him Frank Sinatra Senior.
Right.
You know, like if you're really famous, you probably shouldn't name your kid after
exactly
Joe DiMaggio Jr. Just you don't have a chance.
Also, the fact that Robert Downey himself, that wasn't even his real name, then it gets really confusing. Yeah. It was Robert Elias, so then now Junior is just kind of this like offshoot of an invention. So I mean, there's just so many things to unpack. That's when you know they're born
to be like artists, kind of making up stuff.
But back to touch on that thing with Chris, we jumped in it together, and we have very different styles. He is very composed, a lot of times lock off shots, and he'll do a lot. And there was a point early on where, and I'm a little bit the opposite, and you've seen that in some of the things I've gotten to do over the years. I'll chase things and kind of, you could turn around and now I'm hiding behind a bush filming, or I'm over behind a couch like shooting through a pillow. Yeah. So Chris, I think one day we went and got coffee early on, and he goes, I don't understand what you're doing. I turn around and you're over here and then you're over there. And he's like, I lock off the shot and I do like really composed things. And I just kind of was stunned. I said, well, gosh, I guess, when you collaborate and jump in, and we shot it together, I didn't know what to do. So I just queued up some footage on the camera and played it back. And he said, oh my God, this is really beautiful. Wait, that's what you're doing? Okay. And after that, I think he felt at ease. But if you don't know my process, it could look a little bit crazy. And I think there was a little bit of a thing of like, Senior kind of latched on to that, and he felt comfortable with, me kind of popping around. And Junior, I felt kind of was like, no, like Chris Smith is framing this in a certain way.
Maybe a little more control, a little more chaos,
Yeah, I mean,
a little more improv, a little more.
And they joke about, they call it, his dad said the two camps, and Robert has said, it's like, well, my dad kind of took Kevin, and I was all too happy to go over to the Senior camp, but at the same time, keep my foot in the Junior camp.
Yeah, I guess.
I kind of wanted the best of both.
That's funny, a movie that has two camps, two movies.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. And 5 people involved. It's not like big factions. It's really...
And I mentioned that to you before, but it is really interesting to me. And I mean, obviously, this is a film-loving crowd here, but movies can get so bloated, and there can be so much with crew and PAs and trucks and stuff. And we just had none of that. And I also think for everybody involved, this was such a fun, direct cinema experience. For Robert, he got his hands dirty. For Susan, they got their hands dirty. And a lot of times, I think people just need to, get that kind of taste again. And this movie gave us all that thing of just being in a room and figuring it out together without tons of other people involved.
What a contrast to the world he's occupied in the Marvel universe.
Exactly.
The size of the films and the shape of that and what that must be like compared to a few people making a film, which is kind of closer to his family lineage spirit, so it must have been kind of wonderfully refreshing or
exactly
doing something so personal.
Yeah, I felt or sensed that was for Robert maybe a little bit of a kind of a full circle to like, even like having his own son in the film and reminding him of how it was. So, for everyone, it was kind of a healing and regenerative experience.
I love that moment where grandson says to father the first line he said. That's this film. There's just so much humor in it. It's just so funny, so absurd too.
And in that moment, which was a pretty heavy visit. And suddenly you realize,
within the heaviness,
Senior is still just improvising. That was funny. He refused to do the line as it was in Pound, and Junior finally just gave up. So Senior kept having to twist it.
But that was his humor. Like he's making his films in the '60s. It's a heavy time. There's wars. There's a lot of strife in the world, and he's making these just oddball, funny, but they're serious. But I don't know. That was just his tone.
Yeah.
Continuously, just the whole way. So to the end. So. Well, I'm kind of dominating the mic here. If anybody has some questions, we will take a few. I see a hand up over there. Yeah, interesting question. If you can't all hear it, so yeah, was it always conceived as a black and white movie, or what do you think?
Not at all. We jumped in and we started filming it in color. As a matter of fact, the earliest kind of sample of the project, like when we first cut it together, was in color. But after spending some time with Senior and we kept watching more and more of his films with him. He would have us sit in the room. One day, because again, putting the editor hat on, just started looking at it in black and white. And I took it to Chris and Emily and the rest of our team, and everybody said, "Wow, this feels more like Senior." So in a sense,
Yes.
It was a way to connect to Senior and say, "Look, we're trying to meet you halfway and kind of do something." And it just suddenly felt like we were entering into, yes, it's a documentary, but we're entering into like a shared kind of cinema space where we're meeting his style halfway.
Yeah, it looks like so many, Chafed Elbows and a lot of his 60s and his home movies. I think a lot of that was black and white. But it's so great, like on Greasers and stuff, when it jumps into color.
Right.
The Rittenhouse Square, it's like, oh, yeah. So I like the way it's true to his color work, black and white work in the film. I don't know.
And by the way, early on, we decided that we wanted to do that. Well, then we came and brought it to Senior, and he immediately said, "That's it. Let's do black and white." So it was like let's see what he thinks, and he was way into it. And from then on, we just never questioned it. And then you start making choices visually, knowing it's black and white. So at that point, we, probably pretty early on, we just committed to it. So.
Yeah, well, I think it looks great. So other questions?
There was obviously a point where you go from there's a possibility that Senior is going to die to the fact you're in the room with somebody who is in the process of dying. I was wondering what the conversations were with the family about how you depict that, and at what point does it start to become intrusive or depicting?
Everybody heard the question? I think so. Okay.
So in terms of the discussion around how far do we go, some of us, myself, and I could speak for myself, I didn't necessarily want to shoot till the end because that's not my dad and it's not my family, and I'm questioning all the time, like, should I even be here? Am I influencing things? But Senior himself told us off camera that he wanted to film until he could no longer film anymore. And so Junior said, we're going to follow this thing through to the end because that's what my dad would want. So it was kind of an interesting thing. There was always a sensitivity. And one thing actually, just kind of adding on, and I hope it's not a tangent, but I'll just say briefly, there's a final moment where it's Junior and he's kind of interviewing his dad and he's trying to ask him questions. That was a case where I went in, just set up a camera, got it in focus, kind of checked the sound levels, and then got out of there. And the rest of us just left.
It felt like they were the only ones in the room.
Yeah.
So.
And when Robert came out of the room that day, those of us that weren't in the room were thinking, what's going on in there? What are they getting?
Right.
I mean, this must be the deepest thing ever. Robert came out and he said, sorry, man, we got nothing. We got nothing. And that was because he had a whole list of questions he was going to ask and get all these meaningful answers. So it wasn't until Chris and I got into the edit and actually looked at what really, happened in that room or what, and thought, oh my God, yeah, it's not what Robert thought it was supposed to be. And Robert, in his mind, didn't think that we had anything. And I think it was hard for him because in that moment, it seems that Senior doesn't even connect that he's talking to but at least he's saying how cool his son is. Yeah. But he's not connecting. And at the same time, we felt, well, in the spirit of these guys, we've got to at least kind of show that, because whereas he wanted something specific out of that scene, probably as a son, he wanted some answers. as filmmakers, we felt that actually said even much more, that first
Yeah.
for everything.
Yeah, you don't get exactly what you think. You don't get a literal answer to those questions,
Yeah.
but you get kind of a presence, a vibe,
Yeah.
so it can be unsatisfying, but it's what you
And
get.
and there is a line in there that you hear where Robert says to him, "We're in your face all day unless you don't want us." And so that any moment, Senior could have just tapped his son and said, "Hey," and we would not have pursued that. And I think it's worth noting that day that you see that becomes kind of the final moment that they ever saw each other. That morning, we were told that we were led to believe Senior probably had another year to live. Doctors were saying his stats looked pretty good, so none of us had a sense in that moment that this was it. And I felt like maybe I would be back to do some fine tuning on the edit.
How much time was there between that day and his passing?
Probably about 6 or 7 weeks.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
just curious. I was
Yeah.
like, You
Yeah.
just never know. Yeah.
But I will also say that in terms of the film within the film and Downey Sr. locking that cut, he did say to me, "We got to hurry, kid, because my window's closing." So he had a sense, and maybe the rest of us didn't want to think about that and think, he'll be fine. He's just being dramatic or something. And so Junior has said repeatedly, he said, I kind of knew when my dad finished his movie that he was finished. And yeah.
Another.
So hey, first compliments. All the good things about this film. This is a really great yet tragic depiction of a man's decline due to Parkinson's disease. Even just the fact that this guy is a known bullshitter and you don't know whether he's fucking with you throughout the entire movie until the very last scene where you see him. You're not sure whether he's doing it with Junior, which I thought was great. At what point did you know he had Parkinson's?
And so, yeah, the question is, at what point did we know about the Parkinson's? And you see it in there where we're filming the ducks, and he gets dizzy, and he has to stop. And in reality, once that camera goes down, Senior almost collapses, and Chris and I are just frantically trying to figure out how to get him over to a bench and sitting down. And I had heard that he had Parkinson's, but I've seen Michael J. Fox exist for many years with Parkinson's, so I kind of thought, okay, it's a manageable thing, and he's on some medication. I didn't really understand or know how progressive it could be. And so even when that happened, we were able to just kind of think, that was just an isolated incident. Maybe he was just dizzy that day, it was hot or something. But it turned out that the disease was picking up. So when Senior himself asked that, and he raises up his hand and shaking, and he says, "I think we need to film it." You can hear me off camera say, "Well, what is that?" And he says, "Parkinson's." So I'm not a medical guy, and so I didn't quite understand.
When you entered into this, did you know he had been diagnosed?
I didn't know. And I thought we were just getting into something about a cool, crazy filmmaker, and it was all about his movies. And, I knew he had a cane or something, but it wasn't until he really said, "We need to film this, and I want you guys to show this." And I think, honestly, if I'm honest about it, I didn't really want to know. I have a little squeamish, and I'm not good with medical stuff. So I kind of just wanted to focus on the movies.
Right.
But his dad wanted to face it and put it in there. And anyway, it definitely is something I'm grateful for, because I was with him until the end. And I definitely could see through any disease. And I could just feel that artist that was timeless. When you could just feel Senior when you were in the room like this close with him, he was ageless.
Yeah.
And creative.
And he seemed pretty, some people, Muhammad Ali suffered that the last section of his life, but, you sense there's still a person inside there that can't really get out. I felt he was pretty expressive.
Definitely.
Like he didn't ever feel trapped inside, non-expressive. I mean, or maybe he is so expressive in his face and everything. So
yeah, man,
he was still a good communicator.
Totally, and he knew what he wanted. The German song. I was like,
German
what?
song.
He He orchestrated that from afar, and he
Jump
needed.
up behind a tree. You
Yeah,
know, it's like-
exactly.
That's so
It was so specific, and he was so entertained. He wanted to watch it over and over. Obviously, so it might be the greatest thing that Junior ever gave his dad was that performance in that scene. It brought him so much happiness.
Well, I can't wait to see that within, when we watch Senior Cut or whatever. Netflix better hurry. It'd be a good double feature.
Exactly.
Do you think that's going to happen, by the way? Is it
I
are
sure
there rights
hope.
issues? Is someone working on it?
The nuts and bolts of it is that we'd have to re-clear all the different clips and all that jazz, which, we had an incredible team that went through
Takes forever.
the clearances, every clip, every old stock footage, all that stuff got cleared. And so the senior cut, we'd have to kind of go through and do do that stuff. But I sure hope people get to see it at some point because, and by the way, working on his cut, he leaned over one day while we were editing and he said, "We're making the real movie." And I didn't know what to think because I was like, "But I'm on the other one too, right?" Felt like I was two-timing a little bit, but he was like kind of always nodding and like we were in on something together. So I have a vested interest in that. But what a beautiful experience and a guy, and I'm just so grateful that I'm grateful to Robert for sharing his dad with us. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. I don't think my life will ever be the same. I was face to face with this artist, and it if anything, it just fired me up as an artist to go forward for that next half of my life until the end. I hope that, like Senior, I just love it until the end. And I know you're doing a movie that's going on for how many more years? So I know you're in for the long haul.
We can hope. So, more questions? Anyone? You're right here.
Oh man, it wasn't until last year because for so long the edit, we thought we were making a kind of retrospective about a filmmaker, and really when Senior passed, whatever he and Junior might have intuited and known, the rest of us didn't really quite sense that it was a film about a person passing. And that may sound ridiculous, but we were so focused on him and his films and as a director and this tribute. When he passed, it caused us all to take a great pause. And suddenly thinking back on it, everything had a different meaning. His desire to make his own film within a film suddenly didn't just seem like some rebellious action, but a real need. Mm-hmm. And so that became a framing device. Suddenly him wanting us to film his Parkinson's didn't seem random. It seemed like he knew all along what he was facing. And so the narrative started to really take shape once we could really process that when he was gone and think, oh my God, what did we actually get versus what did we think we were getting? And again, I'm always cautious because I don't want to speak for the whole team. But that was my take on it, was that once he was gone, we all really took a beat and kind of thought, oh man, this is actually something. And I think Junior, I suspect, probably knew that more than we did. That's just my take.
Yeah, and Chris is he's a master of relationships, what goes, between people, and I don't know, that seems to be such a focus of his work, so I could see him wanting to pull. Did you guys have any conflicts in the editing? Conflicts, whatever.
I don't think so.
Or,
what's interesting, because there's three editors, right? So right. Amanda Griffin was the first editor, and again, you probably know because you do so much film, but there's that first pass, and Amanda really laid everything out and really got this thing down. I think after Senior passed, I thought I had a personal vested interest in this. I really wanted to get in there, and I kind of did a life and death pass, if you will, and it was pretty freaking heavy, and And then Chris brought in a really good friend of his that was another editor in New York, and they kind of did, it was a baton, you know. So Amanda passed the baton to me, and then I passed the baton to Daniel, the other final editor, and he brought some levity into it. He saw some things. I think I was still I was suddenly processing the death, so my edit was a little heavier, if you will. They came in, brought levity to it, did some trims, and one of the things that when I, you know, was just like, wow, this is coming together, when they found that piece of Greaser's Palace at the end.
Yeah.
You know, my movie version or whatever edit kind of ended on more of just the death and the sadness. And those guys and you know, really brought in that right punctuation mark. And that was a case where I was like, oh, wow, that was go team. That was a great job.
Yeah, you need that. Yeah,
and it needed it.
What one person's documentaries are so crazy that way. That's why I don't like making them my little experience, because it's, you know, one thing is like, oh, that doesn't mean anything, and someone else is like, oh, that's what the whole thing's about. You know, a narrative, it's written and you know, but you're just having to find it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, wow, it's so difficult, intuitive, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
I had a question about, I guess, I thought it was interesting that you included Robert Downey Jr.'s therapy section in the film, and I wondered if you were, maybe I'm pulling on a thread that isn't there, but it seemed like you were chewing with, in the way that Robert Downey Jr. wanted these answers at the beginning of the film from his father, answers that he didn't really seem willing to give so easily, maybe, or, you know, just didn't have them even necessarily clarified for himself. And then you have the third generation, his youngest son, or his son, kind of so maturely talking about how he's confronting this moment with his grandfather, and like kind of shockingly saying, well, I'm doing this pretty overtly to have memories. Like, that was just kind of a really emotionally mature thing for this like kid to say. And so I just wondered if there was something about kind of the generational processing of one's own, I don't know, whatever, you know. It just seemed like you were chewing with that a little bit.
Yeah, well, the therapist thing, I was like, I don't even know if this is allowed. So I just kind of went for it, and Robert didn't kick me out, you know. So, and he, you know, I'd been around him so much that I think he kind of thought, it's just Ford lurking around again. But there was something to that, and even the moment with Exton shocked us all. I couldn't believe what came out of the kid's mouth. I just was like, damn, like, all I know is that these Downeys have a very deep thing going on.
Yeah, Robert's there's a lot of awareness there. He really knows. And that's what's interesting to see him, who's pretty precise in his thinking, trying to get answers of his dad, who's the opposite, who's just kind of not going to give him what he wants. And I don't know do our parents ever give us exactly what we're asking? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, my parents are here. We could ask them.
Yeah, ask them. Well,
There's a few questions I have. Kidding.
They kind of, I don't know. But I could see Robert and Susan being very honest and open and specific with their kids. You know, just their kids growing up in a very different environment, still very film environment. I'm sure their whole memory will be being on movie sets, very similar, but very different. You know,
it is cool. I mean, you know, when you're
healthier, let's say.
When you're like working with Robert for many years, a lot of people say, "Hey, what's he really like?" You know, and I always just say, like, his mind is just like these little fireworks going up, and he definitely has passed that on to his children. They're very special in terms of like creativity and sparks and ideas, and so there is a generational thing going on. You know, it's not in the film. It wasn't time, I guess, but his son made a film called I Am Exton, and it was like a Downey Sr. film.
I Am what?
I Am Exton, which is his name.
Right, okay.
And it was just this trippy-ass collage of like random imagery of him like hopping around. So, you know.
It skips a generation.
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious to see what becomes of Exton.
questions? I think we've kind of rattled right up here. Oh, I'm sorry.
So I've been trying to watch Pound for like a decade now, and it was a real pleasure to see that restored footage in your doc. Is there any plans for some of his more obscure movies that don't have home releases to come out?
Yeah, I come out of this realizing I haven't seen a lot of his later work. So Pound.
Right.
Really, are these available? Has Criterion done the?
Criterion. Well,
yeah.
Criterion has a box set called
Yeah.
Up Late Night with Bob Downey, and I believe Pound is one of the ones on there. But and so it's really worth checking out, and it's also on their app. But what's really cool was in the process of doing the doc, we were able to kind of backtrack with the help of these incredible archival producers of ours, and get direct scans of prints that haven't been scanned in modern times. So some of the, the footage was like even PUTNEY SWOPE on the like released version is letterboxed, and it was never shot that way. It was always 4:3. So the released version was cropped, and people's heads were cropped and stuff. It was a terrible thing.
Who did that?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, somebody was like, "Oh, let's make it letterboxed," and they cropped the people's heads off. And so Senior was really pissed when we were cutting his version. He's like, "Well, where's the guy's head?" And I said, "Hey, I didn't do it. This was whoever the distributor was." And he's like, "Oh man." So I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think he actually got to see the 4:3 version. But anyway, so we have been able to track down prints and get things scanned, and it's cool. So I'm hoping maybe after this thing,
I really want to see the one. God, I'm blanking the name. Malcolm McDowell's in it. The
Hugo Poole.
Hugo Poole, yeah.
Now that's a case where I think you can go in, to like
available?
Apple or iMovie or whatever it is in Apple Store and kind of rent it or something.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. Films I've looked for years, you just look at Amazon Prime and there it is.
Yeah.
It's like you think, oh, I think it's in a Czech archive. And then there it is on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So you just never know. It's a pretty good era that we're living in that regard. So.
Yeah, and I don't know how this stuff works, but I think if
Poole.
enough people are watching it and checking it out, my hope would be that maybe Netflix snags some of the Downey Senior films and relicense them for their platform so that it would pop up as recommended viewing after that.
I think, that's exciting. I just think it'll expose people to his films, this via his more famous son, obviously. But it's kind of wonderful that it'll lead people not only to those movies, but to such a fascinating time in American indie cinema history.
Yes.
Like he came up at the time, to be around with Shirley Clark, John Cassavetes, late 50s, 60s. What a time.
Exactly. The
period
technology was suddenly portable where they could just pick up and
you
run.
could just feel the freedom they were enjoying. It's
you got to draw the line somewhere, and they had no permits. They were just running and gunning. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty rad.
I
That
know,
was pretty.
and even more magically, you do a film like, we don't know, and then it's showing at the Cinematheque, and then it's getting reviewed in the Village Voice, and then people are showing up. I mean, isn't that amazing?
A reflection of the times too. We went back to that PUTNEY SWOPE alley. It was now an alley owned by some very wealthy people, gated.
Right. New York has a way of doing that.
Yeah, and they had kept the graffiti intact, but it was like now boutique.
Oh,
and
gosh,
we snuck in because there was a delivery happening, and Senior was like, "Let's go in." And that wasn't on camera, but that's how we ended up. We just kind of took it. We just went in and started shooting, and I think some of the people were like, well, what are these guys doing in here? And
that's awesome.
we're like, hey man, he shot his movie here.
50 whatever years ago.
Yeah.
There should be little plaques on the wall.
There should.
Like, this is PUTNEY SWOPE Alley.
One of my dreams was that we could project the Senior cut in that alley one night and have like a little private late night screening or something in the alley.
Yeah.
Or maybe in the Pound, where he shot that.
You always think there's so many, like New York City. Has anyone ever made this movie? Because that city is so well documented.
Yeah.
But like a then and now, you know, like the shot in Stranger Than Paradise where she's just walking down the street. Like, if you could just shoot it the exact same way, the same lens, the same, just, you could do that through like New York history,
Mm-hmm.
you know, New York film history, because it's everything's, I don't know.
Let's do it, man.
But I don't know. It's just a weird idea, but shouldn't
in.
somebody make that film? I want to look at it, you know, but that's a good example.
Exactly.
Seeing
yeah.
the guy laying there and then cutting to today. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very moving.
I love that stuff, just connecting to time
Yeah.
and space. And I mean, I
I
trip
do
out
that.
on
I walk around New York, and if you know where certain films are shot, you know, like in Raging Bull, when he first meets Vicky at the pool, that pool's in the West Village. It's not out in the Bronx. It's right there. You can sit there and go, oh, they shot it like here. And if they panned a little more, they would see modern, but that's set up to be like the 50s or whatever. And
But
still
one of my
works. But you know, it's kind of magical, the real locations. You know.
One of my first jobs when I moved to New York City in '95 was as an usher at the Variety Arts Theater.
The Variety.
Had every bit of meaning to me because that was
Yeah.
where Travis Bickle took his
Right,
date
Variety's a famous old, yeah.
to see a film, and I was like, "This is the theater from Taxi Driver." And
Yeah.
the other people that were working there was like, "What? Just do your job, man."
I know. We gotta, yeah. Yeah, we don't document ourselves. Our own medium doesn't document we're such a transitory, you know, even though we're filming something to be permanent on film, the locations and everything, they're so temporal, you know,
Yeah.
you use them and then you're gone, you know.
Yeah.
So even like if you're in a studio, I remember being on the Paramount lot, and we were casting, and I was in this building, and you know, it's just like, God, I'm in some crappy building, and then someone said, "Oh yeah, that's the building you're in. That's where in Sunset Boulevard. That's Holden's office." I'm like, "Really? I'm in William?" It just made it feel so much better
Yeah.
to I got from crappy office to like, "Hey, this is William Holden's office in Sunset Boulevard." You know, but I would appreciate a plaque on the wall. I
yeah.
want to know these things.
Definitely.
Anyway,
I'm gonna see if I can at least go back on my next trip and just sneak a plaque
yeah,
in that at PUTNEY SWOPE Alley. That could be my own little subversive.
yeah. You
Have
can
to,
put
like,
plaques
reach through
up.
the
All you
gate.
need is permission of the owners.
Yeah.
Maybe they would find that a good thing to have a Putney Swope.
Great Jones
All those
Alley
rich
could
people
become
that
PUTNey
live in there.
SWOPE Alley.
It's like, what is Putney Swope, by the way?
Yeah.
So, anyway, a few more questions? I think we're sort of wrapping up. Anything? Oh, yeah. On, repeat the question? Does it change your perspective on filmmaking? Well, I feel like you've answered that.
Yeah,
But-
the short answer is yes. And it was about the commitment to the craft till the bitter end, for better or
Yeah.
for worse. He was married to cinema. And so that has changed me, and it's reaffirmed my own commitment. It's like a renewal of the vows. So yeah, like that's definitely something that has changed me.
It's a little cautionary too, though. I see this, and you know, it's the danger. Like what Robert, there's lines that strike like thunderbolts in the movie that are just kind of offhand when he says what he said he was 15 when he won that or got placed in that talent thing. He said it was the only time his dad had paid attention to outside of his own films. And stuff.
Right.
You know, filmmakers have a way of just being so about what you're working on yourself. You know, it's a real challenge to
Now you also got to
be
go,
there for
and you also got to go look at
the
the
world
ducks.
around you. Yeah.
Get out, and so that was, I
Exactly, yeah.
guess, later senior also.
Yeah,
You
no,
take some
he's a
time and look at
different
the
guy.
ducks.
No, that was young, on fire guy. Yeah,
So
I found that moving. But you know, if you have a kid,
yeah, absolutely.
that kid doesn't have a choice.
Yeah,
You know, so
yeah, and that goes without saying that I got that he evolved, and you know, like Susan asks, has he come to terms with his impact on his son? We don't know, but now we know he just loves his kid, and so
Yeah.
I think even senior, obviously.
But he kind of fesses up to have smoked pot with it to let
Yeah.
his kid. You know, there was that in between generation that generation, like, well, you know, our parents were so stuffy. We're gonna be the cool parents and do that. It's like, no. The next generation said, okay, that's too much. Let's go back to being, but there's a generation there.
Yeah.
My generation. That,
Yeah.
where people, it's like, depending on your hippie parents, you could have seen a lot of things way too early. Not to be all moralistic or anything, but come on.
Yeah.
But he kind of seems to fess up to that.
So I was curious if you had felt at any point in the production of this documentary, like you ever wondered if something like that would ever happen for you, Richard? Like if anything like that.
Like what?
If you imagine your children eventually having like a documentary chronicling your life in the film industry.
Oh, via my own kids or something? Wow, I would dread the day my oldest, I actually documented my oldest daughter. I filmed her very religiously and I interviewed her very regularly because I thought she, in her future, would have this big project that she was very well documented at all ages. I went a little overboard. And she just eventually hated it. She's like, no more interviews, no. But there is this kind of treasure trove. I always thought maybe she'll go back to it someday. But that was for her. I don't know where I am in that, Because I thought, well, it's just so easy now. There's very little documentation of me, as a kid. So I thought, well, but anyway. I had kids later, and I didn't do that again. But
So
you don't know where to bring in your own. Yeah, I don't know. It's a parenting decision, but.
So we met. I had the opportunity to travel around and follow Rick in his production of Fast Food Nation, and had incredible footage. But it was a rare thing of like someone was like, "Hey, we need you to film. Would you like to film some behind-the-scenes footage of Richard Linklater?" I mean, I was like, "What?" Yeah, and I don't think you knew that, but I mean, for me, that was just an incredible thing to witness. You and the actors and everybody having these creative moments. So anyway, there's some stock footage of at least that one period, if there's ever.
Because you were a filmmaker doing it. Most of the behind the scenes is kind of EPK promotional crap, just trying to sell the movie, where you kind of made your own film.
Yeah.
It was like a behind the scenes interpretation of what we were trying to do, which I appreciated. It was a filmmaker just doing whatever they wanted. So
You literally told me after that, you said, "You're a filmmaker, dude. You need to be making your own films, not filming."
yeah, don't film other people making films.
So that was
Make
very
your own fucking
inspirational.
film. Okay, good. Well,
Yeah, thank you.
that's good. So, back there.
No.
Ask about Netflix.
Yeah, the Netflix
That's more
came-
recent, right?
Very recent. We premiered the film at Telluride Film Festival, and that was our first time showing it to the public or distributors. Netflix had seen a sample, kind of a sizzle reel, not a trailer, but a sample of the film about a year before that, and said, "Hey, this looks really cool." They had a relationship with Chris Smith from some of his other projects, like Jim and Andy. So they said, "Come back to us when this is done because we really like it." But we showed it at Telluride, and it was just kind of to see where it would fall, and that's where it ended up. It was Netflix, and they've been incredible, like helping us to just get the word out and spread it, do what they do.
I think I mean, for documentaries, it's so hard to just find that audience. So
By the way,
you have a
not
good
just
chance.
not just our documentary. Netflix is, this year alone, putting out some incredible documentaries that through this process I've had the chance to see.
Margaret Brown's film.
Descendant. They have one that's dropping soon called In Her Hands, that's set in Afghanistan. So I've really, the times have changed, and I just have been thinking about that there is a platform right now that's putting out some ballsy stuff. It's not just kind of fluff. You know, they're putting out some things with real heart and taking some chances. And so, yeah, to get to meet some of the other filmmakers whose work is going out and just seeing how, you know, they're you know, helping us to at least show it in some cinemas and just get it out, and to be able to even show it to live audiences after being in the pandemic for so long is such a gift and a blessing. That's really great.
Yeah. And I guess during award season too, that gives a little extra juice. You know,
Sure.
whatever. End of year gets people excited. So you're in a
Yeah.
good season.
Yeah, we're in
To
a
be
good
coming out.
season. And it's a family film, so it's
Yeah.
this time of year, that's why it was hitting me so hard tonight. Having my family here and
it's very,
looking at
it's neat.
Robert's family. And
yeah.
yeah, I actually talked to Robert today, and he was happy that we were doing this. And I said, this was supposed to just be about you and your family. Why am I now, you know, thinking it's about me and mine? And he just laughed. He said, that's art, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's
about all their families.
it's about everybody now.
Yeah, sure is. So, okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here, all of you, and especially you, Kevin. Thanks for sharing this film with us, and congratulations again.
Thank
Your
you.
years of toil on this have really paid off. It's a special document. You know.
Thank you. And again, thank you to AFS for existing.
Yes.
And please continue to support them.
Yeah. All those films we're showing, come to all of them, please.
Yeah.
Show great stuff here.
Yeah, I mean,
so-
this is a beautiful space. And
Sure is.
yeah, it's awesome.
So anyway,
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, guys.